With the deadline for a trade deal with the United States just 10 days away, Canada's premiers got an update from the Prime Minister on the state of those talks.
Let's see what happens on August the 1st. I have all the confidence in the world in the Prime Minister. Donald Trump is very, very hard to deal with just because it's so fluid. It's constantly moving with him.
Of course, we would like to have the ideal deal, the fastest possible, but what can we get? You almost need to ask Donald Trump, and I'm not even sure that he knows himself.
I would be worried that if we constrain ourselves that we have to get a deal by a certain date, that we maybe have to, maybe do some things or give up some things or give up some leverage that we might not otherwise have to if we just focus on getting the best deal.
So while top federal officials are hunkered down in those trade negotiations, today the Prime Minister suggested that deal with the United States isn't the only thing on the government's mind.
We have a lot to do in this country. We have a lot positive to do in this country, building this country in a way, building one Canadian economy. Our phone is ringing off the hook from other countries who want to do more with Canada. I've had over 80 bilaterals with world leaders since I became Prime Minister. A number of those premiers have been on major trade missions. We have other things to do, and so we're going to focus more and more of our time on those positive aspects going forward.
So what does all of that tell us about the state of those talks and Canada's priorities going forward? The Power Panel is here to talk about all of that. James Moore is a former Conservative Cabinet Minister. Françoise Boivin is a former NDP MP. Rob Benzie is the Queen's Park Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. And in our Ottawa studio, looking after while I'm gone, Michelle Cadario. She was the Deputy Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Paul Martin. Good to see you all. James, I wonder if I could get your thoughts on what we heard there from the Prime Minister. Those comments at the end that our phone is ringing off the hook, we've got a lot of other options, and we're going to start spending more of our time and energy on those things. I mean, how should we view that?
Well, clearly there's a shift of expectations heading towards August 1st about what will be realized out of the United States, and that Donald Trump is on a pathway to normalizing tariffs between Canada and the United States. And so there's a pivot there in terms of expectations and a shift in terms of priorities. And clearly he's gotten all the premiers on side. It's worth noting, I watched all the exits and all the press conferences of all the premiers coming out of those meetings there. And I have to say, it's worth noting that Premiers Houston and Ford and Moe and even Danielle Smith, frankly, the Conservative premiers are the ones who are the most enthusiastic and seem to be optimistic about where it is that we're going, because I think they've been frustrated for a long time under the leadership of Justin Trudeau of actually getting some projects moving forward and actually happening. And so I think they've been quite enthused about the progress and the tone that Prime Minister Carney has set. And I think these premiers are very enthusiastic about the direction that we're going. The question is whether or not Canadians will be satiated by the promise of projects, the promise of access to new global markets, and whether or not the steps towards more internal trade will actually be realized and felt by consumers in a meaningful way.
Yeah, no, and we are going to talk more about that shift in tone here, because all the premiers are talking about Carney the way Doug Ford used to talk about Chrystia Freeland. So, Michelle, it is a notable change here. But, James is right. There seems to be a change in the expectations for August 1, that these tariffs that everyone hoped were temporary and short-term might be more persistent and maybe even permanent as long as Donald Trump is around. I mean, what's your view on what we've heard from the premiers and the Prime Minister today?
Yeah, I sure haven't heard anybody expressing real optimism that August 1st is the deadline day. So, if they're trying to bring down expectations and then they're going to meet them, then I think that people might be positively surprised by that. But I think that really everyone is just working towards, and I go back to what the Prime Minister actually said during the election campaign. No deal is better than a bad deal. And so we're not going to be in a hurry to sign a bad deal.
Yeah.
And I think that you heard some of the premiers echoing that as well, because there's real consequence for Canada if we do sign on to a bad deal. And, there's very few people, in the country that actually have, in the room that knows what's on the table. But I think everyone is aware of just how difficult Donald Trump is to deal with. And I think Doug Ford said it very well, that it's got to be extremely difficult, and just to pin him down so that he has the same attitude towards an issue on one day as he does on the next day. You know, that's really hard. I think the very fact that we're trying to band together and focus on other countries, clearly, you know, it's a bit of a pivot, but it's also something that he's foreshadowed for quite some time, wanting to have less reliance on the United States. I think it's just now that the reality is that we have to, right? It's not that it's what we'd love to do. We actually have to, just because we can't rely on them in the U.S. at all.
Yeah, look, there is the two tracks, right? Deal with the U.S. the best you can and do the things you need to do to make the Canadian economy better and then do trade diversification. But, you know, Francoise, there is this argument emerging here that even if you move past the sectoral tariffs, which are very difficult and very painful and have cost thousands of people their jobs, so it's difficult to move away from them, that Canada is still in a better position in terms of access to the United States than the rest of the world because of a lower implied tariff rate. The problem with that, though, is that Europe, for example, has a larger tariff on a smaller share of their economy versus a small tariff on all of the economy, or a large share of the economy here in Canada, and that is going to have an outsized effect, even if that is the best achievable outcome.
Definitely, but that is at the same time reality, and reality just by geography. I mean, we're right beside. We're the main reason that Europeans often talk to Canada, because they want to know how to enter the state. So we're paying the price in a certain way. I want to say one thing, though, because I'm so tired of changing my agenda every freaking day. Because the 21st of July, I had it written as the line in the sand. You all taught me the expression in English, line in the sand. That's when we turn around and we do something other. Might have been unrealistic to say so. Then we have the 1st of August. You asked to everybody today, what about the 1st of August? My advice to them would be, I'm with you guys. I think all Canada is with you. But at the same time, stop mentioning freaking dates, because you know that it will not happen. Surprise us. If it is the 1st of August, we would all be like, oh, wow, it's earlier than I even imagined, or something like that. The problem is that at some point in time, we will not believe it. That being said, I also, not because I want to be mean and nasty like a lot of Canadians are, according to certain people, but at the same time, politics is local. And I always love those premiers meeting with the Prime Minister. Already more meetings with Mark Carney than they had, I think, with Justin Trudeau in a decade. But that being said, the occasions might not have been there. The problem is for the premiers. I was looking at my premier, François Legault. Well, not mine, but the premier in Quebec, and who had questions from reporters saying, "Hey, what about health? What about education?" And I'm thinking, all this is all fine and dandy, but when they go back to their province with the opposition parties, and they're going to face election in certain of these provinces, all these speeches are fine and dandy today, but how will they stand the test of time in a few months? We'll see.
Okay, well, you know, Benzie, our graphics department would share Francois' frustration with the changing timeline, because they build these lovely calendar graphics and then they're obsolete the next time the president puts something out. But completely. August 1 is Donald Trump's date. That's when the tariff goes up to 35%, right? So you have to acknowledge it and respond to it, but just what to make of what you heard today as the calendar fades away to that day.
I mean, I think the only thing that's certain about Donald Trump is uncertainty, and I don't know, David, if you had time today to watch too much of Mr. Trump's appearance in the Oval Office and his rambling about, you know, conspiracies and coup d'etats allegedly perpetrated by one of his predecessors, Barack Obama. We're clearly not dealing with a rational administration right now, and that is the thing that I think the Prime Minister signaled, albeit in a very politic kind of way. I thought Doug Ford played the bad cop and let Mark Carney play the good cop when Ford was going on about how difficult Trump is to deal with, and how we've got to stand up to him and show strength and do counter tariffs and so on. I think it speaks to the kind of irrational moment that we're in right now. And I think the one good thing that's coming out of this is that the premiers from across the political spectrum, New Democrats, Conservatives, Liberals, are working with a Liberal Prime Minister who's actually kind of technically more like a progressive Conservative Prime Minister, I guess. That'll crush the soul of the CPC folks who blew a 28 percentage point lead and lost the election in April 28th to Mr. Carney. But I thought the fact that Mr. Carney stayed overnight at Doug Ford's cottage last night speaks to an intimacy of relations that we haven't seen. I mean, no Prime Minister's ever gone to a Council of the Federation meeting before. They've been invited, but they've had FMMs in the past with different prime ministers of different political stripes. But there is a different vibe in the country, and that's thanks, I think, to Mr. Trump's existential threat against Canada.
Yeah, I have never heard of a First Minister's slumber party before, but that's apparently what happened here in the Muskokas. But, James, on that good cop, bad cop, I want to play a couple of clips, if I can, do it back-to-back on the response of what happens if there isn't a deal on the 1st of August. First, Doug Ford talking about going tough, and then the Prime Minister on maybe a gentler approach. Just have a listen to these.
We need to make sure we match tariff by tariff, dollar for dollar, and hit them back as hard as we possibly can. There's one thing President Trump understands, is strength. He doesn't understand or appreciate weakness. He will roll over us like a cement roller if you show an ounce of weakness with the president, in my opinion.
They're very large tariffs. This is a very sharp change in our trading relationship. But when we look at them outside of those very important sectors, steel, aluminum, automobiles, forest products, prospectively copper and pharmaceuticals, the effective tariff that faces most Canadian goods and services is very low.
So, James, I wonder what you make of that. I mean, the dollar-for-dollar tariff doesn't seem like something Mark Carney wants to do. I mean, what is your sense of how Canada needs to calibrate whatever its response has to be after whatever happens on the 1st of August?
Yeah, this is where the debate really needs to go, and where some really thoughtful analysis needs to be done about what the impact is going to be on Canadian consumers. The elbows up, tough guy stuff that we've had basically since the first quarter of this year, when Donald Trump talked about 51st state and coming after Canada, imposing the tariffs. It's fine to say that, and it's fine to be aggressive about it relative to the United States, but it gets you only, frankly, so far. About 1/5 of Canada's economic output per day goes down to the United States. About 1/4% of the United States economic output comes north to Canada every day. So the pressure of us being able to match dollar for dollar and to impose as much pain on them as they do on us is not quite square. We can do it uniquely in some certain categories, in some certain regions, and some certain products. We can have some bite and some pushback if we want to. But this idea of having a deal on August 1st, I mean, I'm increasingly of the view of, why do we have to have a deal? Donald Trump's going to do whatever Donald Trump is going to do. If he wants to impose taxes or tariffs on the United States economy and punish American consumers, then go ahead and you do you. If you want to hurt Americans, you go ahead and hurt Americans. Trump tariffs, let's castigate them for what they are. Let's let American politics swallow that in, chew it up, and decide what they're going to do with that in the next presidential cycle and in the midterms in a year and a half. But for Canada, why should we necessarily punish Canadian consumers because Donald Trump is hell-bent on punishing American consumers? So let's think about that. And whether or not reciprocal tariffs on Canadian consumers is going to have a consequence hasn't really had much so far. So I'm increasingly of the view of, let Donald Trump punish the American economy as much as he wants. Let's protect Canadian workers who are impacted by those tariffs. Let's beat down internal barriers to trade and get maximum economic benefit. Let's blow open doors to international markets to get some more economic benefit from there. And maybe let's just ride out, see if we can, as much as we can, ride out the Trump tariffs while we can, and see if we can mitigate that as best as we possible through global and internal markets, and not punish Canadian consumers. I mean, the idea, frankly, that you're going to have, dollar-for-dollar reciprocal tariffs in the auto sector, for example, well, Canadians better start really liking RAV4s and Silverados, because there's not many other car brands and choices you're going to have in Canada, right? So, so it's a really important conversation about what we're going to do and what's most effective, and whether or not we want to punish Canadian consumers in an ineffective way just to act tough with no real benefit.
Okay, I want to get a quick reaction from everybody, and then I got to get to a break. So, Michelle, your thoughts, and then Francoise, and then Betsy.
Well, I actually think that James kind of laid out what the Prime Minister is likely thinking right now, and it certainly kind of demonstrates what his action has been. You can talk tough, or you can do what's in the best interest of Canadians, and sometimes it's a mix of the two. And I don't think that Doug Ford was speaking off strategy. I think that it was very much, a collaborative kind of approach to be in terms of getting those thoughts out there. The one thing I'd add to what James is saying is that Canadians are demonstrating by their own dollars and by their own spending that they're not going to the United States. Yep. And I think we noticed that one of the senators today brought that up when he was meeting with the Prime Minister. And talked about, wanting to bring Canadians back because, they like us, they like our money, and they like our friendship. Well, I think that there's nothing more stronger for us to do. And we're all doing it just because we, generally Canadians just have decided that themselves. No one had to tell them. And so, I think that we are all part of that strategy. And unfortunately, there's certain industries, though, that can't just ride it out as is. And the Prime Minister mentioned those today.
Yeah, and I like American booze, but I'm not drinking any of that either. Francois, your thoughts, and then Benzie, and we got to take a break.
There's not a bigger friend to the States than myself. I vacation there like almost 2 months every year, which I will not do this year. And that breaks my heart, but I would feel like not at ease to do so. And that's something that they broke. So I'm so with James on his suggestion of strategy, in a sense that what does a bully hate the most? To be ignored, that the people he bullies are not afraid of him. So by ignoring and turning around, rolling our sleeves, working, showing that we might be smaller than the Americans as a country, less people, but we have resources, we have the know-how, we have the education, so many good things. It's time for Canadians to show our pride is not just based on the American products, but it's also on Canadian-owned things. And see, there might be other people who want to be friends with us. So I think that would hurt Donald Trump much more, and that's why I think that's what our premiers are working on. And I do hope, and that's the point I was making earlier, is that the opposition parties in every provinces realize that it's not time for petty politics. It's time for everybody to join into the movement that we are seeing right now.
Okay, Benzie, quickly, I got to get a commercial because I got a Holiday Inn Express bill I got to pay before I leave town.
You know what, David? No, Francois and James and Michelle are bang on. This is a strange moment that we're in, but counter tariffs, I don't think would necessarily be that productive. As you said earlier, I think today in one of your dozens of appearances on TV, it's like a circular firing squad, and I think that's one of the things that Mark Carney will be very, very mindful of. We cannot cut off our nose to spite our face.
Okay, we're going to leave it there, take a quick break, but love is once again in the air at a First Ministers meeting. Can you believe it? The Power Panel talked about it earlier. We're going to talk about it more, about the big change in the relationship between the federal government and some premiers, all premiers. Stay right there. While Canada's premiers say they are united against U.S. tariffs, there is also some unity in their praise for the Prime Minister.
I actually have tremendous confidence in the Prime Minister and the team that is representing us as Canadians.
The Prime Minister is the most humble person you'd ever want to meet. He listens. He's a smart business person. He's a very good man. He's off to a good start. He's an honest man, too. He just wants the best for Canada. He doesn't need to be doing this, I can assure you that. But he's given it everything he possibly can.
Okay, so this is all a very significant shift in the federal-provincial relationship for a lot of the Conservative premiers, but can it last? Power Panel is back to talk about that. James Moore, Françoise Boivin, Rob Benzie, and Michelle Cadario. Benzie, you and I normally see each other at these conferences. I don't ever remember this kind of conversation happening. What do you make of this total shift in the federal-provincial dynamic right now?
I think circumstances have forced the premiers together to band together with the Prime Minister, certainly the existential threat posed by Mr. Trump's tariffs. But I also think Mark Carney is good at relationships, and relationships really matter to people like Doug Ford. And Carney, before he was even sworn in as Prime Minister, flew to Toronto, sat in a diner in Etobicoke near Mr. Ford's home, had a really good get-to-know-you session. visited Ford during the federal campaign, where he huddled to talk about various strategies and so on. And then, of course, as I already said earlier, stayed last night at Ford's home in Muskoka after a dinner with the premiers there. Ford said they were up till 12:30 chatting by the fire. Mr. Ford did not drink alcohol, so this was not a late boozy night by any stretch. It was two men seriously having a chat, I think. So that's it's interesting that the relationship has changed. It's like Justin Trudeau, it didn't exist. It's very, very interesting to watch how the past 10 years have suddenly been forgotten almost.
Yeah, Francois, I have an image of them roasting s'mores over that fire, and talking about things. But it's interesting that there is a Venn diagram of common interests now at these meetings that actually overlaps. It's not two circles in the opposite parts of things, because they are talking about shared priorities and shared interests. And while it may be good for the Prime Minister politically, you can't help but think this is just good for the country to finally have this forum seemingly working.
Exactly. It's absolutely fantastic. I told you about my agenda. I just wrote down 22nd of July. All the PMs are, the premiers are raving about the PM. So we'll see again how long it lasts, because we've all been in politics or around politics, and that is nice. But it's a nice tone. I want to be. I want this to sound optimistic on my part. I hope it lasts, honestly. Because every premier's conference with prime ministers, be it Stephen Harper in James Moore's time or Justin Trudeau, you didn't have that sense of unity, of my goodness, good tap on the shoulder from pretty much everybody. Danielle Smith being happy that Quebec might be into pipelines. But again, because we put aside words that were like climate change, health, education, where they could clash, because now we have one objective. So I'm sure the Prime Minister, being as humble as Premier Ford described him to be, is taking this with a grain of salt, knowing full well that it can change pretty quickly. But as long as it lasts and people work in the same direction, it's all of us Canadians that benefit from it.
Right. Well, Michelle, that's a key point Francois made. Like, let's see how long it lasts, right? Because they are talking about largely the one thing that they can all agree on out of sheer necessity. They're not talking about health. They're not talking about climate. They're not talking about housing, at least not in the front of the store, maybe in the back of the store. But what do you make of the dynamic that's emerged here?
Well, I worked for Prime Minister, and we gave out a lot of money, and I don't remember ever him being invited for a sleepover. I'm just going to say. And I really think that, a lot of this just really, it lies at the foot of Mark Carney. He set the table about how he was going to interact with people. He's not an overly partisan person by nature. And he's earnest in terms of what he wants to do. Clearly, he's the most qualified person in the country that could be doing this job and that could be leading these negotiations. And so I think from the premiers, it's an acknowledgement that, we do have somebody with a very steady hand at the helm here. Of course, there's going to be disagreements over the next 4 years, and without question. And, as soon as we start trying to divide up any kind of pie, then everyone wants to have a different kind of calculation as to how that's going to happen. So we can expect that. But I think on the Premier's part right now, they also have the expectation from their voters that they're going to be cooperating with the Prime Minister, that they are going to be rolling up their sleeves, and that they're going to be trying to make things happen that are in the national interest, because that's also in the interest of each province. And so I think that absolutely, I think that everyone is being very sincere, but I also think that they're living up to the expectations of the people who voted them in.
James, how long do you think this lasts? I mean, does this have the shelf life of a newly opened carton of milk, or could this go on for a period of time?
Well, I think it depends on the deliverables, right? I mean, the reality is there's a commonality of enemy in Donald Trump. And not only that what Donald Trump is doing is objectively bad for America, bad for Canada, bad for the North American unity that has led to generations of prosperity, but that he does it in a stylistic way that catalyzes people to want to fight and push back and to show Canadian solidarity. So all of that goes in the way that's favorable to Prime Minister Carney and to the premiers. But still, with all of that momentum and all that dynamic in your favor, you better start showing some real results. And I think that's what's going to matter. I mean, I imagine there'll be some solidarity and some solid unity, certainly through the rest of calendar 25. There's no election in British Columbia for a couple of years. Same with Ontario. Quebec is late next year. Alberta is, I believe, late next year as well. So both of those are pushed off. So there's a window of opportunity here, probably straight through until the midterms in the United States next year, where you can actually show some progress and stay united and stay focused. We'll see what happens on August 1st. We'll see what happens with the major project list. By the way, Pierre Poilievre and I think the federal Conservatives do deserve some kudos as well for joining in this moment as well, because they lent their support to Bill C-5, the legislation that enables the major national infrastructure projects for unity. So there is a real all-hands-on-deck, country-first moment here that I think everybody recognizes. And I think, there's kind of a Pearsonian moment here that Prime Minister Carney seems to be stepping into the mold of, where, Lester Pearson as a prime minister in a minority government, and the time that he was prime minister wasn't a long time, but a lot got done that was really consequential and long-lasting. And in this moment of threat to Canada's economy, where nobody really seems to know, if you didn't know, if you're not a serious observer of Canadian politics, you wouldn't know who was on the orange team, the blue team, the red team. It really wouldn't matter. Everybody really is pulling together, and I think that's a real benefit, but it needs to show real results that Canadians can feel and see.
But, Benzi, it's interesting because, the federal Conservatives, to James' point, have been less critical, and more supportive on things. Though when the Prime Minister did suggest we might have to live with a level of tariffs, he was criticized as that being, a political defeat by the Prime Minister. But when I asked Scott Moe for his reaction on that, whether he thought it was a political defeat, he just said, no, this is the nature of dealing with Donald Trump. And a year ago, I don't know if he would have been quite as charitable, right? So there is something else happening there.
Yeah, well, Scott Moe sees that he's got a prime minister he can work with in a way that he couldn't work with, or in his view, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. You can't blame the federal Conservatives for opposing the government on issues of the day. That's their job. I thought it was smart of them to support Bill C-5. I thought it was a little churlish when Poilievre talked about why they supported, basically saying it was the least that could be done. But look, at the end of the day, they voted for it, and that was politically smart for them. A lot of small C Conservative voters elected Mark Carney. That's why he's the Prime Minister today, and that's why he could be the Prime Minister 4 years from now still. He's brought the Liberal Party back to the center in a way that I think some federal Conservatives doubted could ever happen. They were convinced that it was the social justice warrior party under Justin Trudeau, and now it's back to being almost like it's a Paul Martin / Jean Chrétien Liberal Party in many ways, except that Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien, when Martin was finance minister and Chrétien was prime minister, had to make some very difficult choices that made the premiers very unhappy, cutting transfers to the provinces. Carney is being Santa Claus still. He's telling them what they want to hear and not cutting transfers yet. But, a few years from now, who knows what he'll have to do.
Yeah, we'll see. He's got a tough economy and a budget coming up. Michelle, we got about 45 seconds left, but to James' point, the cast of characters at this table could change with the series of elections at a certain point down the road. So they've got to harness this now or risk losing it.
Yeah, they absolutely do. But I also think that the U.S. Election cycle is going to have a lot to do with it as well, right? In many ways, it's hold your nose for the next 3 years, and it's going to be really rocky, and there's going to be an expectation that we, in some way, all row in the same direction. Perhaps not as harmoniously as is happening at the present. It would be very hard to think that that's going to last for too long. But I think that we can't discount when somebody is trying to really destroy our economy, right, that Canadians aren't going to come together. And I think that as long as Donald Trump is there, that's what we're facing.
Yeah. It's interesting. The premiers you talk to here, they hope this vibe lasts too. So, it's not just at the federal level. Like, we'll see. We'll see. Got to say goodbye. James Moore, Françoise Boivin, Rob Benzi, and Michelle Cadario, thank you so much.